All right, Simone, if you go to the next slide, the session will basically run like this. I'll give a little, maybe the slide doesn't show it. I'll give a little presentation at the beginning with some of the results from our global student survey to basically start the discussion a bit. And then we will have 3 lovely speakers on board, which I will introduce a little bit later. And with them, we want to explore 3 different questions, which is the strengths and weaknesses in attracting young talent to the forest sector, the general challenges job seekers, but also employers face, and what educational institutions and forest sector employers can maybe do to help overcome them. And then lastly, what are the skills that young forestry professionals need to succeed in the forest sector today. So this is the idea behind it. We see how we get along. If we stay this small group, we might actually do question and answers as we go along. If not, we just collect them and do it and have 15 to 25 minutes at the end to do it collectively. Right, Simone, if you go to the next slide, or maybe I should also introduce myself. I'm Lisa Pryor. I also work for the European Forest Institute, and I will be moderating this session and then also give a little presentation. Right. So to start off, since this is supposed to be as interactive as possible, we have this Mentimeter set up. If you're familiar with it, there's 3 ways to join it. I forgot to mention Joanna Greco from IUFRO will also send some very helpful information in the chat as we go along. So right now, I think she posted the link to the Menti. You can either go on the link she just posted, or you can maybe on your phone go to menti.com and enter this code that you see on the slides up there. And there we already see we have quite a few people from Finland, Germany, India. So this is basically to warm you up and for us to get a little bit of a better overview of who's with us here today. Right, Simone, if you want, you can also move to the next slide while I get my presentation ready. It looks like we might stay at 24 participants only, but that makes it easier. So if someone really wants to say something, you can also just raise your hand maybe. Right. There we go. Okay. So as I mentioned, we did a survey with our project, which was entitled Educating Towards Forest-Related Employment, a Global Student Survey. And I will basically just give you a glimpse of some of the results and start with a little bit of the demographics and the data, but mostly focusing on some results that evolve around, first of all, the motivation of students, what attracts people to actually study a subject. So very much linking it to this question of what does the forest sector have to offer. And then secondly, about career decisions. So what are students basing their decisions on, and what is actually their motivation for a career. And maybe also a little bit on how educational institutions or employers could help them with this. All right. So this, I need to find a place to put this window. Sorry. Okay. So the study ran last year from June to December, and it was a solely online survey targeting students as well as recent graduates of forest-related courses. We had it translated into 5 languages overall, so mainly in English, but then a little bit later from July on, we also had it in Chinese, French, Portuguese, and Spanish available. And mostly we did our reach out through the networks of the 3 organizations. So we definitely reached a lot of students that might already have a bit of an inclination towards international, an international interest. As for the data, we ended up asking, ended up asking 62 questions, and that was already the result of a process of slimming it down again and again. But yes, I definitely learned that next time I will focus a bit more and have less questions, because it gets a bulk to analyze. And also it takes a lot of attention for the people taking the survey to really go all the way through. We gathered over 1,600 responses. Nearly 1,000 were completely full. The rest was partial, but still useful for some of the questions. So I was quite happy when I saw earlier in this plenary session the numbers for students that FAO reached, and I think we were quite competitive with our survey there. Just for the basics, to get a better understanding, what was our demographics, who did we actually manage to reach and survey? We targeted students and recent graduates here with RG. Mostly our respondents were students, and most of them had a bachelor level or were currently pursuing their bachelor's. But I think this representation of having a large number of bachelor students and then slightly less master students and PhD is also quite representative of how the education usually goes. As for gender, we had a relative balance. We don't know for a large part of the respondents, because that was one of the very last questions in the survey. But it was quite interesting to see that we seem to reach almost parity there. Right. Lastly, what's of course very interesting when you have a global survey is to see how this distribution works in the different regions. I think we did receive quite good numbers from all continents, but outreach was a bit difficult, especially in Africa and surprisingly in North America as well. As for the focus of the students that participated, the largest majority was pursuing a degree in forest science or in forest engineering and management. So it should fit the key focus group we were looking at. Right, and now a bit to the results. And don't be too afraid of all the graphs. I've just really used them as a little bit of a support, but I think it's fine if you don't look at them too much in detail. So for the study motivation, I thought it was quite good news that over 60%, almost 70 actually, said yes. They started studying a forest-related program as their first choice. So it wasn't just a consolation prize, they really intended to study forestry. I also thought it was quite interesting to see that if you look at it separated by the continents, that Africa and North America, this number was slightly lower. So there it seemed to be more often that people end up studying forestry, even though they didn't necessarily have it as their very first choice. And I think we, for everyone that was in this session 1.2, we heard, or at least in the chat read, similar stories from the African region. If you then look at it by level of degree, it seems that people that reach a higher level of degree are more likely to say, yes, this was also my first choice. Now, without making any assumptions, I see 2 very good explanations for this. Either people that did this out of passion from the beginning are more likely to progress further, or simply once you reached your PhD, you forgot that you didn't fall in love with forestry in the first place. But I think it's quite nice to see. Yet there is some improvement to maybe really attract people to this. Right. We also asked the students to rate the importance of different factors. So what factors played in when they made the decision to go into a forest-related program. And beneficial work, meaning making actually a difference and having an impact on the environment and on communities, was by far the one that seemed to be most important, or seemed to be important to most of the students surveyed. Same for job satisfaction in working. That seemed to be quite important, but earning potential specifically was not quite so important. And I wondered if this is because people that go into forestry naturally aren't as focused on this, or if this is because the forest sector also is not necessarily known for having very well-paying careers. So maybe that's an interesting factor to discuss, if this is an obstacle also for career seekers. Staying on this sentiment of doing something good, we also had a couple of statements we asked to rank, and one of them was, when deciding on a job, is the impact of the environment. The impact of the environment is important to me, and this was overwhelmingly agreed. So it seems to be quite an important factor for young students in forestry or young people in forestry today to really have a positive impact on the environment in their career. So this might be also something to discuss in the context of green jobs, that there's quite some relevance to this. I skipped this one because I think we already started 5 minutes late, so I don't have to overdo it. So where do students actually want to work, talking about career ambitions? We again asked them to rate different types of employers and how likely they would, or how much they would like to work for them. And interestingly, international organizations and research organizations ranked very high and got very positive feedback, while a lot of the more traditional employers like public forestry service and NGOs and governments, or maybe NGOs not so much traditional, were playing somewhere in the middle field. And then self-employment, not as popular. And we heard some engaging stories earlier today about increasing entrepreneurship. So apparently this is something not so high on students' agenda yet. But what I found very interesting was that private companies were seemingly least attractive. And we did something similar, also asking for different fields of employment. And there it was a similar picture, that conservation and research ranked very high, while forest industries were not so attractive. Actually, the only thing less attractive than forest industries seemed to be working in a non-related field. So maybe there's some room for improvement there. Yeah. Then maybe something employers can consider in how to overcome some of these obstacles is working outdoors seems to really be something that people would enjoy to do, while working in an office environment is so-so. And I was wondering about the home office, because when we did our survey, of course, the Corona pandemic had already impacted lives quite a bit. And it seems home office, even though it's always said this is the big trend, is not even that appreciated, at least by our survey participants. Right. Now, when it comes to what can maybe educational institutions do, I thought it was quite good knowing that a large section of the students actually reported, yes, I already have a very concrete goal, or at least I have 1 or 2 career goals. So it seems they are quite knowledgeable about what careers are out there and what they want to do. But there's still room for improvement, because there's still quite a few that say, yeah, I just started thinking about it, and also stating that they're knowledgeable about forest-related careers. There was quite a few saying maybe not so much. So I think there's still room, and this is maybe something also educational institutions can pick up in educating a bit more about the different options. And this is also now the last part about this career ambitions, and in a similar way. So when we asked about different activities and how helpful they were for career decisions, work experiences, practical exercises, field trips, and also the exchange with professors were reported as most helpful. And while field work and talking to the professor seems to be available to most students at the moment, because we also asked them to only refer to the things they actually experienced. There is still quite a bit of improvement when it comes to work experiences, to field trips, and sort of workplace excursions, especially internationally. So not a lot of the respondents actually had experience in those. And here I think this is something that both educational institutions and maybe also employers can pick up to increase the possibility for students to take field trips and to make room for work experiences in their curricula, but also to work together with employers to come up with some job info days or do excursions specifically to workplaces. So, and lastly, in this component, I keep very, very short. We also actually had a focus on the skills in our survey, but this is the one where it really still needs to be analyzed. But what I found quite interesting, maybe to vamp this discussion about which skills are needed for a career today. The graph you see here, we asked everyone that reported that they had some work experience, and most of them reported they had done an internship or traineeship before, which competencies they actually enhanced most during this experience. And very important here reported was the ability to work in groups. So this seems to be something that might be easier to be learned on the job than in an education setting. And then also the ability to communicate both with non-experts, but also with experts was rated quite high. So maybe this sort of soft skills and communication skills are quite of importance. And I leave it at this. And for everyone that's on the Menti, you should hopefully by now had the chance to also put some questions there. But we will refer to them a little later, and we will actually move on a bit with the program now. And let me just close my window here. So we're all back. And then we will continue now with our 3 lovely speakers that we have invited today and with us today. And first of all, I would like to introduce Dr. Tatenda Mapetu, who's a lecturer at the Nelson Mandela University. And she will introduce herself a little bit to us. And we also asked that each of the speakers gives their view on what they think the forest sector has to offer to young talents. So please, Tatenda, go ahead.
Thank you, Lisa, and thank you to everyone who's attended this breakout session. Can I just confirm that you can hear me? This is something that I do every time with my students. All right, thank you very much. So I am Tatenda, as Lisa said. I teach at the Nelson Mandela University, and the themes for my research and teaching are around really educating our students for the decision-making environment in which they operate. This could be as foresters, or as forest managers. So that means forest management, forest measurements, forest economics, finances. How do we quantify and qualify the decisions that we make when we're managing forest ecosystems? So the department that I'm part of is called Forestry and Wood Technology. It's in the School of Natural Resource Management. I think it's an important thing to mention that the school also has programs such as nature conservation and agricultural management. So we try and give a holistic viewpoint to our students for natural resource industries, and also to try and facilitate interdisciplinarity, transdisciplinarity at the undergraduate and postgraduate level. And I want to talk a bit about obviously what we try and do at this juncture of forest education and employment. And I've got 2 points on what we think we are getting right and one that is a challenge at the moment. So firstly, our training has historically and is still focused on a fit for purpose for industry, with the bulk of what I'm calling industry obviously being private industry. So it's interesting from your survey that students are tending to move towards conservation and research. We have what I can call a Y model, where students enter the university and they have a range of topics that equip them. After 3 years, they can become a manager or a forester or forest manager. but that 3 years has got a year of experiential training. So they actually get attached to a forestry company. This has proven to be quite helpful in our students securing employment, because at least more than 50% of them actually end up getting a job at the company where they were attached. And it also is evidence on their resume or on their CV for some form of work experience. I think another point is obviously that this is also representative of all South African tertiary institutions that offer forestry, is that we have what we call advisory boards or industry advisory boards that we consult formally. So they take the form of different things. These include annual consultations for emergent issues that are coming from the industry. And also, this also includes, for example, individual educators like myself. We have to be constantly in touch with the industry through things like getting our assessments moderated, as well as obviously incorporating things like guest lectures and trainings. So if I can give you an example, one of my modules, we have to train students on the information management system that that is used by most companies in the industry. I do not have the skill set to be able to impart that to the students, but what I actually facilitate is a 3-day training that enables the students to be able to get the experience, but a competitive advantage when they get to work, they actually know how to use the system that is being used at work. So those are the two. So it's the consultations as well as that experiential learning year. They really give a competitive advantage. The challenge that we have at the moment is we probably haven't tapped into the full value chain of forestry industries, because we focus on the production part of forestry. So that's your pulp industry, your structural timber industry. And this in a way is limiting the industries that we're exposing our students to. And, but what we've noted is once our students get into mid-career stage, or they do a postgraduate study like a PhD or a master's, they're able to become adaptable to these other new type of jobs like the carbon certification industry or the conservation industry or the research industry. So there's something to be said about adaptability in what we expose our students to. That is still a challenge, but we need to think about that. Then the last thing in my introduction is, what does the forest sector offer to attract young talent? Obviously, it's a growing sector. It's been established since the 1200s, and it's still growing. So one sector that's been there for the longest time, but has been said to have a 5% growth, at least for the next 10 years that we know of. And there is a wide array of sectors opening up. And I think the globe or the world is turning the wheel on placing nature in a central position for the well-being of humanity, biodiversity, planetary systems, and all these green things that we talk about. So there is a lot of opportunity to actually tap into that broadness of what the industry, of what forestry is all about. So yeah, that's it from me for my introduction, but thank you very much.
Thank you, Tatenda, for this very interesting introduction of what your institution is doing to really give students a good start. And yes, forestry is old and growing. I think there is a lot to offer. We might just need to highlight it a bit more. Thank you. And I will introduce the second speaker for our panel now, which is Adina Lehikonen, and she is the current president of the International Forestry Student Association. And similarly, I would ask her to introduce herself a bit and what work IFSA is doing, and also addressing this question of what the forest sector has to offer in her perspective.
Thank you, Lisa. Yeah, so hi everyone. I am Adina Lehikonen, the current IFSA president and a student in the University of Helsinki, studying forest sciences. And IFSA is the largest international network of students in forestry-related fields. And currently we have 130 local committees in 60 countries. So truly international, but also willing to have even more local committees in countries that we don't yet have. And our mission is to enrich our members' education through international events, networking, and intercultural exchange. And when possible, also online events when international events don't work that well. So how we do that? We try to improve our members' employability with a variety of capacity building activities like CV workshops and soft skills trainings. And I think that was already touched upon lightly, how soft skills is often something that students get from work experience and so on. And I think also that our organization and such other student or youth organizations that can be present in students' lives can do that, as well as work experience. And what I think are the weaknesses and strengths of attracting young talent? Well, the biggest weakness I certainly think is the forestry just not being well known. Students in high schools, when they're picking careers, they don't think of forestry as a viable option because it's not often something that's focused on. If they're interested in, even if they're interested in forests, they might not end up studying forestry, but for example, biology instead. Forestry is not, like, you have to have just a bit of chance there to find out about forestry in the first place. But strengths, I think there are a lot. So if we manage to do that bit of advertisement to high school students and whoever else is in the phase of picking their career path, I think we have a lot to offer. So another thing that came out in the introduction was that people, when thinking about their careers, were interested in careers that I don't remember exactly how it was put, but they wanted to do something that was beneficial work. And I think we in forestry have possibility to do exactly that. Like forestry has an impact on climate change and biodiversity loss and food insecurity. And like there are so many ways that you can make the world a better place through forestry. And also, when you're in forestry, there are many ways to do that. Like many people, I think about ecology when they hear about forestry in the first place. But it's so much more than that. If you're interested in chemistry, you can get into wood science. If you're interested in a more technical aspect, you can get into GIS. If you're interested in social sciences, you can get into social forestry, there's forest economics, etc., etc. There is so much that forestry can offer. It's interdisciplinary in and of itself. So I do definitely think that we have great strength here, but we just need to learn to advertise them.
All right. Thank you, Alina, for this very passionate speech about forestry and why we definitely have a lot to offer, and also for highlighting how an international organization for students like IFSA can help also in these times where everything is online. I think a lot of IFSA students were quite happy to keep having this link and source of motivation. So thank you, Alina. And then let me introduce our last speaker. So our last speaker of our all-female panel today is Vera Steinberg, and she works with the liaison unit Bonn for the Forest Europe. And I'm sure she will introduce a little bit more of what her focus right now is.
Yes, thank you, Lisa, and thank you very much for having me on the panel today. Yeah, my name is Vera, and I am actually a forest ecologist by profession, but I work currently as a policy advisor at the Liaison Unit Bonn, or LUBO as we call it, which is the support office of Forest Europe. Forest Europe is a voluntary high-level process at the pan-European ministerial level. So we have 47 signatories who all form this informal process. And Germany took over the chair at the beginning of this year. And the chair is always supported by a liaison unit, and this is where I am working. So the liaison units are serving the signatories, and currently we are drafting our work program. And if it gets adopted in September, one of our work streams will actually be green jobs and forest education. And this will be my part of work. We have also other work streams. So for example, we will focus on sustainable forest management. This is one of the core businesses of Forest Europe. And we will also focus on forest risk knowledge mechanism. So there's definitely a lot to do if you think about climate change, fires, bark beetles, and so on. And what I like about my potential work stream is that we both look at the forest education side, but also at the green jobs, because it doesn't help if I have wonderful green jobs, but no students who want to study it, and vice versa as well. So I really need to look at both sides of the coin. And I would also like to highlight that already previous liaison units were dealing, for example, with green jobs. So we have, we think this is a very important topic when it comes to the forest sector. And what we can do is, for example, that we are facilitating expert groups, we can host webinars. We are also already in contact with IFSA if there's potential for joint webinars on different topics. For example, how to enter the job market now with COVID. But this is all in the planning phase. And another aspect I would like to highlight about Forest Europe is the beauty that we can actually talk to all stakeholders. So we can really talk to NGOs, we can talk to governments, to entrepreneurs, to big organizations. So we're in touch with FAO, with UFRO, with IFSA, and it's a very colorful work I'm doing at the moment. And this is, brings me to the question, what offers the forest sector? Because when I started forest ecology, I did not think about becoming a policy advisor. And I think this is one thing which is really nice, that there's so many fields of work, as Alina was just mentioning. There's so many career choices you can do. You can become a practitioner, a scientist, entrepreneur, and so on and so on. But what I really enjoy about working in the field is the feeling of a corporate identity. So I'm not sure if this is true for everyone, but certainly for me, I sometimes feel that I'm part of what I call the forest family. So it's really a nice field of work. So there are a lot of people very dedicated to their job. They really love to work with it. As we also saw in your survey, maybe the income is not the first choice why you start to study in this field. But it's more about being part of really a true green job and giving something back to nature and society. And it's also the long-term thinking. I mean, forestry is maybe the only functioning intergenerational contract, if you think about it, because we can only harvest what our ancestor planted, and we are planting now what our grandchildren will harvest. So this is really a long-term commitment, and maybe the only functioning long-term commitment after all. So yeah, I think we have to offer a lot, but as Alina also mentioned correctly, we have to advertise ourselves a bit better. Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you, Vera. That's actually a very interesting thought. I never thought of this as a bonus point of forestry, but I guess it is. It's not just meaning you have to be very patient because everything takes a long time. It also means that it's one of the few things that already takes on board the sentiment that's becoming so current right now. Well, thank you very much for that introduction. I also think it's very interesting to see what the Forest Europe process will do in the coming years. And Simone, if you could share the Menti screen and go to this slide 6, so we could see what if the participants actually entered anything and what our word cloud is showing for this first question of what is the most attractive thing. Huh? Well, very low participation, I see. For anyone that isn't on there yet, if you want to give your feedback from the audience, please just go to the menti.com and use this number up here. But We have some attractive parts mentioned here. We have international experience, renewability, sustainability, a very variety in the workplace, and yes, fresh air and field work. Like I said before, working outdoors is still pretty much a draw of the sector. So with this first round of introduction and already addressing one of our core questions, let's move a little bit on to the next one, which is maybe a bit more difficult in itself. When we formulated it, I think we weren't quite 100% clear yet, but in general, we wanted to address the challenges that job seekers and employers face in today's job market, but then also look at what institutions or employers can do to overcome them. And we broke it down a little bit further. And I would actually like to first ask Alina to tell us a little bit on her perspective of what the biggest challenges for fresh university graduates are at the moment. And maybe also if this is the same all over or if there's differences from her experience with the big IFSA network. And yeah, how can an organization like IFSA help the students with those obstacles?
Sure. So I don't have any definitive data. We haven't done a survey in IFSA, but I'm trying to speak from the experience that I have talking to different forestry students all over the world. But well, first of all, I must say that no, it's definitely not the same everywhere. I personally come from a country where we have a very big forestry field and a lot of forestry jobs, and mostly the challenges after graduating when finding a job are competing against people who are not from forestry, but because we have a lot of jobs in the forestry field, people with different diplomas from non-forestry, but in the same area. Like you can get an economics degree or a GIS or ecology degree with a non-forestry focus and end up working in the forestry field. So those are the people you have to compete with for jobs. But then again, in other places, there are very few job opportunities in the forestry field. So you have to compete against a bunch of other young forestry professionals, which definitely presents different challenges. And in those cases, well, in all cases, it is just about the competencies and the skills that you have managed to acquire during your studies in university and out of university, because it's not just about the hard skills that you learn in university. I generally actually believe that mostly the skills that you learn, like the hard skills that we learn in forestry education programs, are pretty good. But what is lacking are the soft skills, and that's what we then try to focus on in IFSA, because well, we don't have this one answer. What is it that will help you get a job after you graduate? But we want to help students with the competencies that they feel like they lack from their formal education. So we do such workshops and trainings focused on more of those soft skills, as well as we offer networking opportunities with other forestry students as well as forestry professionals. And these are all things that you can already do during your studies. And I get that you may not have all the time, but often, like, those are things that you can fit to your time, how much ever you have time to give. We're happy to have you here for one webinar in half in 6 months, if that's what works for you, or if you're interested in acquiring some more work experience to show in your CV, join us as a volunteer. And this goes for, like, of course, I'm advertising IFSA here, and that's what I know best. But even if IFSA is not your it's not the organization that you're most interested in, there are a lot of NGOs that I'm sure would be happy to have you, and where you can acquire similar experiences to fill your CV with. But then again, maybe if you feel like you're lacking something in soft skills department, we really try to focus on that. We do believe that that's what helps helps students a lot.
Yes, I can only echo, as also a past IFSA official, that it does help a lot to get this out of the classroom experiences, volunteering, and it does prepare quite well for what's to come in the job market. So very relevant statement. Thank you, Alina. With a slightly different angle than maybe asking Vera, because I brought it up a few times with the green jobs, and she said her focus is green jobs and forest education. So maybe can this concept of green jobs and contribute to some of the issues we have in the forest sector that weren't maybe mentioned so much yet, but still health and safety and decent work conditions, but also inclusivity can sometimes be an issue. So is this and maybe some of the other obstacles what green jobs can be a solution for?
Thank you, Lisa, for this very relevant and very big question. It is, at the moment, I think, a very challenging time we live in for different reasons. So on the one hand, we have a very increased demand on society on the forests. We also feel that there are political changes towards how we want to use our forests. I can speak here only for Europe, but I know that there are a lot of discussions going on worldwide as well. On top of that, we have the COVID pandemic, so it is very difficult at the moment to plan for the future. We don't know how many, for example, public money there is available for research. We have also, from the employer side, the travel and meeting restrictions makes it very difficult, because of course for young people who wants to enter the job market, it is difficult because they can't maybe go on a job fair, for example. But the same is true for the employers. So they would like to meet the next generation of employees, but they just are not allowed to meet. So this is definitely one challenge. We also heard already about the image of forestry in the forest sector. So this is something which is which needs to be addressed as well. And we also have a generation clash. So the forest sector itself is growing older, and we have the young generation entering the job market. We have digital natives, we have the Generation Z, and there might be very different expectations. What does it mean to have a decent job, or what does it mean to have a work-life balance, for example? And to overcome this, I think we can only focus on communication and to be very honest on needs and expectations on work. And also maybe both sides have to adjust their views a little bit when it comes, for example, to the employers. So some of them, or one approached me and he said, well, I just don't speak the language of the youth anymore. And I found that a very interesting sentence, because he really realized that he needs external advice when it comes, for example, to campaigning, to using all the social networks, all the social media. And I think this is actually a mindset which is very, very true for many people in the sector. When it comes to health and safety, there are a lot of green jobs emerging now dealing with health, especially mental and psychological health. So there are a lot of green jobs which you would not immediately think about when you are dealing with forests. People spend a lot more times outdoors. We also saw that during the pandemic. So it's getting more and more attractive to be part of this outdoor world. And yeah, advertising Forest Europe a bit again, we have also a nice publication on our website called Dr. Forest, which is dealing with forests and health. But of course, we also talk about the health and safety of people working in the forest. And to be very honest here, it remains dangerous. So working in the forest is one of the most dangerous jobs, depending also on the country you live in. It's difficult to obtain really data because a lot of work is informal, or there's not a proper statistics on it. But we also see that, for example, digitalization is helping here. So the more we know about conditions, also about weather conditions, forecasting, the safer the jobs can be. And additionally, here we see the lifelong learning. So the education is very important, and also do training courses for people who work in the forests to learn about the newest machinery, what happened in the field of technology. This can help to improve the safety for forest workers. Yeah, decent work is definitely something the forest sector tries to address. There's the concept of green jobs promotes the development of a standard on decent work, but this is currently objective of a study in the forest sector as well. This year, there were guidelines on promoting green jobs published by FAO, UNECE, and Forest Europe. And there's a whole topic about, or a whole chapter about decent work as well. And also the Sustainable Development Goals number 8 and 15, they explicitly address it. So it's definitely a big part of it, but again, there's some room for improvement. So it is very difficult to make a statement which is true now for the whole globe. I mean, the situations are very different if you're in Europe, or if you are in Africa, or if you are in Latin America. So please bear with me if I'm not making a too specific statement now, but for sure it is discussed a lot, and there's a lot of awareness going on, and there's also a lot of studies. The same is true for being inclusive. So especially women in traditional communities are involved in the forest sector a lot, and they are responsible a lot for the conservation of large parts of forest biodiversity. This is maybe even more true outside Europe, but there are many general challenges for women in the labor market. So I'm not going too much into detail now. That would be a whole topic for another session. But the gender inclusivity in the forest sector can help to tackle these issues. And pretty much all meetings and discussions I join nowadays, it's a big part. So the gender issue and being inclusive, for example, is also now in our work program again in Forest Europe. And this is always kind of a baseline already, which you're not touching anymore. So this is actually a very positive step also. When I see this as a young woman, I'm very happy about the development. But here it's also important to really say that we have to include all the stakeholders, all the politicians who make the laws. There are so many pressures on the society, on forests. So it's still a long way to go. But forestry is really something, one sector which can help a lot, and I think it's getting more and more. So thank you.
Right. Thank you, Vera. Quite some interesting parts, and I think you were right. It was a very long and broad question I put you there, but yeah, it sounds like green jobs can definitely do some bits, and is already starting to address some of those issues with especially decency, but also inclusivity. And what I thought was quite nice picking out is you mentioned that learning IT and technology can help quite a bit with safety. And I think this is especially true, putting this together with the statement of not speaking the language of the youth, just advocating for lifelong learning. So not just asking what can educational institutions do now for students, but also how can we maybe make sure that people continuously learn to keep up with all those changes. So nice, a lot of nice sentiments in there. Right. Now, Tatenda already touched on this a little bit in her introduction, but I'm sure she still has a lot to share on what is it then the role of educational institutions? What can they do to increase the awareness of possible careers, but also to maybe assist students in making their career decision and choices?
Cool, thanks, Lisa. I think at this point in time, anyway, any industry, even if it's not forestry, we are seeing a change where the role of education institutions is being questioned over and over again. And that is starting from, do students go to tertiary or TVET colleges for education or for training? So we are always having to walk a tight balance between what does it mean to educate and what does it mean to train? And I'll start from, for example, how do we increase awareness of possible careers from an educational perspective? I think I did touch on the exposure, the practical exposure, but that practical exposure needs to be steeped in real world learning and teaching opportunities. And that's actually going back to frameworks that we've known for a while, such as problem solving. And I'm also going to borrow from some of what Elena said in terms of the challenges of employability. When someone studies forestry, you're competing for a job with someone, for example, who's a GIS technician or someone who is an ecologist or an entomologist. And as educational institutions that are offering forestry, one of the things that we are seeing as important is really to improve that. How do we build the soft skills? How do we build those other humanities type of skills in our students? Because only a forester or someone who started forestry is supposed to bring that systemic thinking that an ecologist will not have, is able to bring that connection type of thinking, is able to bring that holistic type of thinking. So a GIS technician will focus on making sure that they map the land and they produce the resources for spatial technologies. But as someone who studied forestry, you're supposed now to see how does geospatial decision making connect to the actual resources that are going to be accessed to the forest and connect to the communities that are going to benefit from the forest. And those skills are not ecology or forest management or forest engineering. They are really those softs, as we prefer to call them, soft skills, but they're really connectivity type of skills. And the last point is from an educational perspective, is we also need to start looking at how do we make our curriculum, how do we build it such that it has got a lot of opportunity for adaptation, and including current developments and current research that is going on in the industry. Often the university is an old institution, and it often takes time to put change, but we need to lead and say, well, at the moment, forestry is a hot industry. I would want to say that because of the green jobs, the circular economy. But however, how do we then actually capitalize on those developments in how we teach our students? So when you teach a section, for example, if I take from what I do on how do you quantify the resources in terms of carbon, how do you relate that to, for example, a RED Plus project, and how do you maybe bring someone who is currently working on that project to show the students the connection? So I see foresters or students in the forestry degrees or diplomas as the connectors between all these other expert-based industries that can pass for forestry, but often that connection is a challenge. So yeah, that's what I have to say.
Thank you, Tatenda. While listening to you, I think this topic of whether forestry should be holistic or should go down this path of more specialization was already discussed when I first met you discussing forest education 5 or 6 years ago in Austria. So it was interesting to hear that you've come to a firm conclusion that forestry should definitely take this holistic approach, because that's what sets them apart from all the other specialists they're competing with. So that was quite a nice outcome. Right. since we're running a few minutes late, I will not look at the Menti at this point, but I'm sure Simone will keep moving from question to question in the back, so you can still give your input. And even if we might not share it in the session, we will definitely look at it later and include it in our summaries. And instead move a bit from those challenges and how to tackle them into this big question of skills that I also shied away from in my presentation. So what are the skills needed today? And I think we stay with Jitendra, and you already mentioned a bit the soft skills and this connectivity. So maybe not so much the question of what are the skills, but how do educational institutions actually then ensure that their staff stays up to date and their curricula stay up to date with emerging issues, and then making sure those can be delivered to the students?
I think there's maybe a few points to be said in terms of staying up to date. It comes back to industry working groups, advisory boards, and industry working groups that are representative, because that's the other challenge, where you've got a dominant sector in the forestry industry saying what skills are important. But I think we need to start looking at multiple perspectives, multiple ideologies in terms of how we stay up to date. And the thing is, forestry is an applied science. So the good thing is that the research and the education and the learning that we have takes a shorter cycle in terms of product transfer or technology transfer between the industry. So I think as educational institutions, we really need to be comfortable in the notion that universities or any other form of forestry tertiary institution is not only a place of knowledge creation, acquisition, integration, entrepreneurial thinking, but it means that as an educator, you must be comfortable in being vulnerable and not knowing everything. I think sometimes we face as professors that know everything, and they often out of touch with what is happening on the ground. So it's time that educational institutions are okay to say, I don't know actually how to do this. How do I bring in experts from outside the institution, but with the goal of linking the learning experience to the outcomes of what you're trying your students to be equipped with in terms of the education and the skill set, and ensuring that we become hubs of facilitating access to opportunities. I think when I went through the chat, one person said, the challenge is often getting those places where to integrate industry thinking. But that's the challenge. There is no way we're going to be able to do everything. We just need to work in a more integrated way. Yeah, that's it from me.
Thank you very much. And yes, I think it's true. There's still quite a few educators out there that could very much benefit from this lesson of admitting that maybe sometimes it's good to not know and find someone else who does. Right. I think I'll go next with Vera a bit, because you mentioned green jobs and a bit of what it is and what it tackles. Do you also have any ideas of what the skills are that are needed for those jobs?
Thank you, Lisa. When reflecting about that question, honestly, the first word that came to my mind was flexibility, because the sector is changing at the moment so fast that we really don't know anymore if things we learn and teach at the moment will still be needed in 5, 10, 20 years. We don't know about artificial intelligence, what is happening there on a global perspective as well, not only specific for the forest sector, but generally. So maybe this is also a bit of a personal view, but I think being flexible and being having the soft skills, which were mentioned already. So communication is key. But also doing courses in, for example, the digitalization. That is something which is very crucial for the coming years. And when I was also thinking about how it was for me when I entered the job sector, I think being realistic was very important. So when you're searching for your first job, there are maybe a lot of ideas and expectations you have, like the location, the topic, the salary, the team, or maybe your dream company you would like to work at. But it's not impossible, but maybe almost impossible to have all those things met for your very first job. So I rather see it as a long journey where you take the first steps and then you see along the road how it is going. If you ask me for specific skills, again, it depends on the area where you want to work. And it depends so much because there are so many new job opportunities also coming up. So that we have the classical forester, but also the forest kindergartner, for example. And he or she maybe not even consider herself as being part of green jobs in the forest. But from my perspective, this is totally part of green jobs in the forest sector. So if we were all together now in real life and not in the virtual world, I would, for example, have my business card with me, and I would kind of try to connect and network and share with you my contact details. So also this is maybe a skill students and also all young people entering the job market should practice, or not be afraid to get a no. Maybe that is one skill that one can train a little bit. So yeah, it's a very broad answer again, but it's just in the other breakout room 1.2 I was joining before, there was a similar question, and the answer was the skill we need are superheroes. So it is so hard at the moment to really say what is needed, but I think I can pin it down to flexibility, communication, and digitalization. Thank you.
Right, thank you, Vera. Well, superheroes with networking skills. That's what we go for then. I see there are some hands up, but I will give Alina also a last opportunity to share with us what, from her perspective, are ways that students or young researchers or young people can obtain some of those competencies that we heard now outside of maybe the regular university system.
Yeah, so I've already talked a lot about IFSA, but I'm gonna give examples where we do this, because it's not just through the courses and trainings and workshops that I have already mentioned, but also I think it's important to communicate and interact with different people in different kinds of settings. So what you get from university often is just like the classroom experience and maybe some fieldwork experience where you work with different kinds of people who are students and educators in academia. But in addition to that, there are so many settings that you don't get to experience through the university experience. And those are like conferences and delegations and mentoring and general networking. And those are the different types of experiences that it's good to try to enhance those soft skills and your interpersonal skills and networking that are all needed, that are just exactly those soft skills that have already been mentioned several times. As well as, internships and traineeships are always sought after, and those are what many students want, but also not always very easy to get. In some regions, there are more opportunities for those, in some regions less. But I think, again, volunteer work experience is so valuable and so important, in addition to paid internships or unpaid internships. That's work experience still, where you work in an organization, in a team, doing some kinds of tasks that are related to your field. So interacting with different people in different settings, be it a conference or an organization or a course, whatever. Those are good experiences to look for.
Thank you, Alina. And yes, different people, lots of communication and networking. I think that's right on spot. While Simone will pull up the Menti again, so we see a bit of what everyone else in the room thinks the skills are that we need, I would like to, and now my screen is gone, ask Gary, who had his hand up for quite a while, and I also saw just wrote a nice comment, if he would like to ask a question or give a comment.
I just want to say that, and I'm sorry, my video doesn't seem to be working for some reason. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Our experience is that our students at North Carolina State University in forestry, natural resources, environmental technology, and management, if they've done an internship, if they worked in the real world, almost 100, maybe 90% or more of them have a job when they graduate or have a job several months after they graduate. These are people that have shown themselves working in an organization, learning the skills that you've all talked about in soft skills, technical skills. They've performed for people on the job. So I think that is a critically important experience. My experience with students in Sweden is the same, that over 20 years, most of the students in forestry I encountered were either working or had worked before they came to school. So they had a sense of what the job required, what people expected, how to perform in those organizations. So the more we can get students to have those kinds of experiences through internships, through summer work, through part-time work while they're in school, the better they are when they come out the end as products that will evolve and develop, continue to learn, continue to use those skills that we've instilled, but also that they've picked up and seen other people using. So I congratulate all of you on your performances today. They were excellent, they were focused, and like we hope our students are, you know, you'll go out and do great things no matter who you are. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much for that comment, Gary. And I think you're absolutely right, and it's even good to get some experience before you get into studies, because you know a bit better. But I also just reflected, when I started to study, there was one university in Germany that required you to have an internship beforehand. And that was partly the reason why it was the only one I did not apply to. But in hindsight, maybe it would have been still a very good head start to do this. Right. There used to be another hand up, but I lost it now. So if someone from the audience wants to either raise a question or a comment, make yourself known. Otherwise, I will check if there was anything in the chat. Right.
Hello.
Yes. Uday, go ahead.
Ma'am, instead of talking about internship, instead of making students after graduating for internship, they should give internship for the students within studying semesters after they complete a particular course. Hello, are you able to hear me?
Yes, but I didn't quite catch what the alternative was instead of an internship.
For alternative, we can do that NGOs, weekend NGOs to the high school students for making them awareness about forestry. Instead of so many students they think about the money and they jump into the other sectors like medical, law, or engineering. So we should main focus the students that they should love the profession of to love the trees mainly.
Mm-hmm.
Ma'am, that's my suggestion. Thank you for giving me that wonderful opportunity.
No worries. Thank you very much for the comment. And as I don't see more raised hands or questions, I will refer to my little document that Janice is providing me with things she picked up along the way. And yes, maybe something to, well, to ask all of you, but maybe Tatenda would be a good person to start it off. What's your experience with co-curricular activities? So students getting some credit for maybe volunteering or for any things outside of university. Is this maybe an avenue to go down, or?
So we have co-curricular activities within, I wouldn't say co-curricular. So we have that year where students are actually attached on a work experience with the forestry company. And in that way, they get to actually do things that are beyond the educational curricula. In terms of when they are on site within the university, we do not we do not credit them in any way for participating in co-curricular activities. But we have found that students voluntarily actually want to participate in co-curricular activities if they are linked to international organizations such as the International Forestry Students Association, IUFRO, FU and FAO, because they see the link between getting that international knowledge on their CV, or understanding how what they're learning translates to the bigger picture. So they generally actually just raise their hand and want to be a part of it. If it's local, then it has to be linked to their communities and how they see that benefiting to, say, a primary school where they went or a high school where they went. If it's not linked in any way to their future or their intrinsic person, then they're not really interested in co-curricular activities. Yeah.
But they're the best part. Right. Actually, I just saw in the Menti there was another question specifically to Tatenda, so I'm just going to pick it up before I forget it. It's relatively short yet concrete, which was asking if there is any PhD scholarships available for your institution.
Yes, I would say that. I think there are PhD scholarships that are linked to the national research strategies of the country through what we call the National Research Foundation. And we also, as educational institutions, often find grants that are related to emergent research opportunities. And currently there is a lot of momentum in the topics that we research in forestry. So if you think about climate change, if you think about restoration of ecosystems, if you think about carbon credits and how that might play out in indigenous and natural forests on the African continent, there are quite a few projects that are out there, as well as forest education funded primarily through Europe. We have an Erasmus grant running at the moment. So if one would like to pursue a master's or a PhD, I think it's important to read around the area that you want so that you find out what those people are working on, and just cold contact them. You never know what comes back to you. Yeah.
Right. Thank you, Tatenda. Then my little mice have been typing up some more questions, and we touched on this a little bit before, but maybe Alina, we touched on entrepreneurship, and I mentioned it in my presentation. I was quite surprised it wasn't as popular, but forestry is quite changing and has a lot of innovation. So what opportunities do you see for forestry students as entrepreneurs? Is this something that maybe IFSA also addresses in some way, or?
Well, entrepreneurship hasn't so far been in our focus, although I do think entrepreneurship in forestry is very important. And a very interesting opportunity which forestry students should be encouraged more to take a chance on. Entrepreneurship is also something that teachers, like, it would be good if those skills were taught in universities, but if not, maybe extracurricular courses for those would be a good option, such as maybe what IFSA could offer. I know that in some conferences that we've we've run a pre-conference session or side event focusing on exactly that. But it might be a good idea to expand that to what we can offer online and constantly. So yeah, I do think entrepreneurship is very important, and as forestry is changing all the time, there are opportunities for that. So it would be a good idea to encourage young forestry professionals and students to experience more on that field.
Right. Thank you. And then we actually got a question from the chat to whoever feels like it. So nowadays we see financial and other fields experts transitioning into forestry and climate change and other industries. So how can a forestry or natural resource management student improve to compete?
Can I get a part of that question? I'm not sure I clearly understand it.
I think actually it's been addressed a little bit. So we're now competing with people that trained in other sectors like financials or climate change things, and they're transitioning into forestry now. So what can students that actually trained in forestry do to improve and be compatible?
Yeah, I think you're right. It comes back to that width versus depth debate in terms of forestry students. But I think it's important to be adaptable. Like I think Gary mentioned it, and he said it's important that you know enough to be able to engage with the experts and non-experts. In that way, you hold your light in showing what it means to be successful in a forestry business, but from a biophysical perspective, but also from an economic perspective. That integrative nature will still be lacking in people that only have one skill set in either the biophysical side or the economic side or the social side. So that is really a strength, I think, that forestry students need to understand. How do you link the money to the social side and to the biophysical side? Yeah.
Yes. Very good. Since we're heading into the last 5 minutes, I think I asked all of you to prepare it, but maybe you also have changed your mind a bit. So I would ask maybe Vera to start with some final key takeaway messages, but also key recommendations. What are the top things that forest education needs to do or improve in? Yes.
Thank you. It was a very interesting and very inspiring session for me today, and I would like to thank a lot my co-speakers as well. What I take away is that there's a lot of things going on, and it's changing a lot, so we should also not be afraid of changes. And it's also that we are all more or less facing the same obstacles. So if one feels a bit insecure, this is absolutely fine, and one is not alone. And one thing that just came to my mind at the very last question, so this is absolutely spontaneous now, is I mentioned before that many people working in the forestry sector are maybe a bit humble because of those long-term perspective. But of course, at the same time, it is also important to show what you can do and to not be afraid to sell yourself every now and then, especially when it comes to competition. So don't be afraid to raise your voice and to show that you're there and that you're very well trained and that you can do good things for nature and society. And I'm looking forward to the rest of the conference. And thank you, Lisa, for organizing this session.
Very well. Thank you, Vera. And also thank you for being available for our session. I think it was also a very nice and diverse view of opinions. And next, maybe Alina for some final remarks or your key recommendations.
Sure. So what I think would be key is adding those soft skills courses to the later stages of forest education programs. And I think that's important in the later stages because when you first come into university, what you're interested in are the forests. That's what you came to study, and that's what you want to learn. So anything extra to that doesn't feel as important and is not something you want to focus on. But when you get to later stages of your university career, you start thinking more about what comes after university. You start thinking about the career and job opportunities and what are needed in that. And that's when you might get more interested in those soft skills. So we in IFSA will continue to fill in those gaps in formal forest education, offering courses in soft skills and workshops. But I do also wish that would be brought into forestry programs themselves.
Very well, thank you, Alina. So basics first, and then do the soft skills as the cherry on top. And then lastly, Tatenda, would you also share your concluding remarks and key recommendations for forest education?
Cool. I just want to say thank you for the invitation to this panel. I learned so much. And I think we've got 58 seconds. So I would like to say we need to teach our students for contextually relevant opportunities, enculturate them into the knowledge and the work-life paradigms. And how do we also make sure that they have this integrative lifelong learning type of skill sets and they remain adaptable. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Tatenda, and thank you all three of you and all the participants for being in this session and making it lively. We will have another session tomorrow at, I think it's at 10 o'clock.